I'm going to my cardiologist, well, then I want that doctor to see a certain set of my data. But if I'm going to a different doctor, I want that doctor to see a different set of my data and basically sort of pull them up to see them in context, right? So in the cloud view of the world, cloud computing is not a distribution channel for utilities of internet stuff. We are the cloud. So I should be able to, based on my context as an investor, choose which combination of data I need to see what certain companies have invested in, but I don't need to see the other data. So it's more of a pull-oriented notion of data than this sort of push one. I mean, the internet is not an electronic query service for documents. And that's the one thing that I have trouble with XBRL understanding is, in order to do these filings and after all this tagging, I'm emailing XBRL instances into the SEC or up to a site. And if we were emailing HTML instances back when the web got going, the web never would have taken off. So what I worry about is I could just leave the data where the heck it is, lower its footprint, and then just put roles and responsibilities around it so I can suck it out and look at it the way I want to.
So talking about looking at things the way you want to, I kind of want to see a scenario where Michelle would find, let's question the validity of XBRL for a second, and think of a scenario where you would find, some nugget in the financials from reading it. And I want to see if that same nugget, maybe from another panelist perspective, can be determined and sought out by XBRL. What's something that you look for on a day-to-day basis when you're reading through the financials as a point of interest?
I mean, we look at obviously a lot of things. I mean, just to step back and explain how I'm looking through the filings. 13,000 publicly traded companies, roughly. Even under the best of circumstances, every single one of them has to file a 10K, 3 10Qs, and a proxy statement, and that's assuming that they file nothing else. So you start to multiply that, then you throw in a couple of 8Ks into that, and you start to see how much, and there's no rhyme or reason. Some filing could be a couple of pages, or it could be over 1,000 pages, so you can start to see just the amount of data. And, when we actually pulled the numbers, now that I'm part of Morningstar, they acquired this company called 10K Wizard, and they were able to look at some of these numbers, because I was like, it seems like, there's definitely days when we're reading a lot of filings, and obviously, there's seasonal patterns around filing season. And there's roughly 600, just to put this into perspective, 600,000 filings that come into the SEC. And of that, 1/3 of them are insider trading related. So for those people who have any familiarity with the SEC filings, those are forms 3, 4, and 5. So there are sites out there like Insider Score, for example, that do a really good job at kind of slicing and dicing that insider trading information and saying, okay, I see that Patrick Lachette bought 100,000 shares of Google, or that he got a restricted stock grant of this, or what have you, and then they kind of slice and dice that. But it's that other it's those other 400,000 filings that I'm really focused on. And that's where you start to run into where do you start to really, dig through those? You really need to have sort of a system. And so what we do is we say, okay, those 400,000 filings that are coming in, we have textual alerts, basically. That's what I consider to be my secret sauce. Is there's word strings and other sorts of things that I'm looking for in the filings. And I have, every time one of those word strings hits, let's say the word subpoena. So the word subpoena hits in a filing, and I want to know about it, because subpoena could be a significant issue. You want to know that about it. From an investing point of view, you want to know that. So we get an alert, okay, this company, let's not, I don't want to use Google all the time, but let's just say, let's go up with a boring old company like IBM, right? And let's say there's a word, so the word subpoena appears in an IBM filing, and you're like, oh my God, I gotta pay attention to this, so I get the alert, but then, so the way that the system works now, it can tell me where the word subpoena appears in IBM's filing, but it doesn't allow me to really, there still needs to be a human being who looks at that and says, okay, here's the example, so it returns to me. We may be subject to a subpoena at any time. Who cares about that, right? I mean, that's just like boilerplate language that nobody really gives a crap about. But what if it said, we have received a subpoena from the New York State Attorney General's office, and our CFO is about to be frog marched down Pearl Street tomorrow morning at noon. That we obviously care about from an investor's point of view. That's the type of thing that would send the stock, down very sharply. So from an end user perspective, and if you think about all the people who are invested in IBM, they want to know all of it. They would want to know that information. And I'm just using IBM just to be clear for any legal people out there. I'm using IBM as an illustrative example. I don't want their attorneys coming after me.
So let's talk about string searches, and I kind of want to know how maybe Mr. Eric Cohen can say XBRL can kind of enrich those string searches. How is that possible? And do you have an example?
The example. So a foundational example to XBRL is that one of the people who was with us at the founding was a distressed company analyst. Now again, XBRL, we've got the public information, we've got private information, and hopefully XBRL can streamline them all. But let's start off with the simple one, which is that companies that are distressed may not be putting money into their pension plans the way they ought to. And so this distressed company analyst would have his little trick. He would look at a financial statement, turn to the employee retirement plan disclosures, and would look for one of three phrases: would have, could have, or should have. And he calls all these his weasel words. If he saw we would have put the money into the pensions, but we could have, but we needed to put them into, or we should have, but we didn't, then he'd immediately know that that company was having difficulty. So if you have the text and you've got the computer tools that let you know this is your pension disclosure, because they go by many different ways. You can't just bring it up from Edgar and look for pension, because it may be employee benefits, it may mean any number of other words. But this way, if you know absolutely, positively, and consistently that it's going to be pension plans and distribution, then you can do those text strings, look for the phrase would have, or should have, or could have in this box and get information back. Now, there's other information that perhaps people will be able to make available in the future. I know that Gary's going to talk about all sorts of social add-ons where people can say, I happen to work for a magazine, and company ABC, oh, I won't say ABC, that's a real company, company XYZ happens to buy huge ads in our publication. And we've noticed that after 5 years of putting in these huge ads, all of a sudden they went back from half